Welcome to Let's Talk, a show about talking to kids about race and racism. I'm your host, Karen Tao. In this episode, I meet with Brandon and Weston, who are raising their two adopted Black children, Xander, age 9, and Zoe, age 5. They talk about the struggle to raise children with different experiences.
He is perceived by the entire world differently than certainly I was growing up. It scares me to death to be raising a Black boy who's going to become a teenager.
And the importance of involving the greater community in these discussions. We've been talking a lot about how can we keep Xander safe, how can we keep Zoe safe, and the onus is not on them. The onus is on everybody else. Before you adopted your children, what were some of the conversations you had about race?
I think, thinking of ourselves as being very, socially aware and conscious about social justice issues and those sorts of things, we had the privilege of not having to deal with those issues at all. And so when it came down to having conversations about kids, I remember getting the form that when we were adopting that basically said, what sort of races would you consider when adopting? And it was down to, what was it? I thought it was even more than that, but it was like, would you be okay with a quarter Asian, a quarter Black, a quarter Hispanic? It was, which is such a weird thing to even consider. We very much had sort of a colorblind attitude towards it, because we're just like, well, of course, whatever, it doesn't matter to us, it'll be great.
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting conversation because there was literally a grid, and you had to check the boxes and it was, I don't know, to think of race in that way. I'd never sort of drilled down and thought so deeply about that component of it.
Absolutely.
But we certainly didn't at that point consider everything that question was really asking us.
Right.
It was really a very heavy thing.
It's a piece of paper, and it was all, like you said, theoretical.
Yeah, it was all theoretical. We had no idea what decision we were actually making at that point. It was, we wanted a baby, and it didn't matter. Yeah. But I'm glad that there were other steps along the way that better prepared us.
Right. Tell me a little bit more about how those conversations shifted.
Actually, it was more for our second adoption than it was for our first, where a home study agency that required that we take some courses, and there was one that was talking about race and adoption and interracial adoption, transracial adoption. It was giving some tips on how to better prepare you for dealing with issues that might come up related to race, and what to do to better support your children. And it had some suggestions like, it tiered it in coming up with the first tier thing you can do is, I think, as you hire professionals in your life, whether it's your pediatrician or whatever, you look for people of color who can be in your kids' lives.
Growing up, that's not something we had to ever think about. And then when you have kids, you have to be a lot more intentional and a lot more deliberate about everything that you do, from who you hire and who you bring into your life. And it feels odd because you don't want to feel like, hey, I'm making friends with this person because they can, be that racial mirror to my child. But at the same time, you've got to be deliberate about getting and finding those resources so that they do have those, especially here in a community like Utah, where it can be a little bit more difficult.
We can say every single day to our kids, you are so beautiful, and your skin is so beautiful, and your hair is so beautiful, and we do. But if everyone they're looking at and everyone they're seeing every single day does not look like them, or they're exposed to media. In fact, we've read Snow White and to Zoe, and I changed the words as we're reading it because it talks about how beautiful her white skin is. It's it's white as snow.
White as snow again.
Right,
yeah.
and so it's. You realize when you become aware that that's something you want to try to bring into your child's life, you realize that the first step is cleansing what you have, because there's so much of it that puts on a pedestal something that they can never be,
right?
And says that this is what is beautiful, and you can't be that. And what a horrible message to send to kids.
And and at home, certainly, you just pick up these books and you don't realize until you sort of sit down and think about how is my child taking this message in, because it's going to be very different than the way I see it. People creating this media, do it from sort of a white perspective, and they don't even necessarily think about the racial component to it. And asking yourself, is this piece of media, is this book, is this video, is this reinforcing stereotypes, or is this something that is sending positive messages to my kids?
We can sort of shield our kids from some of this and kind of think about like what should we bring into our house and not bring into our house. And then they're at school. There's a lot of stuff that happens on the playground, and I wondered, have there been conversations that you've had with Xander and Zoe that they've brought home and initiated with you about race?
We're exploring, helping him learn better and the learning issues that he might have in school. And when things like that come up, where it's maybe suggested by a teacher that he needs more attention, you can't help but wonder, is my kid unusual, or is this? Are you noticing him more? Or, I don't know. It's just an awareness that we're trying to have, so that if something were to come up, we can address it. But it's hard. It's so gray that it's hard to figure out where those comments and suggestions are coming from. Because we've read things that talk about how kids of color are disciplined more, and the school-to-prison pipeline.
Sure.
So we're
statistically, you have a lot of sort of proof for this disproportionate number of, especially Black and brown boys who are targeted.
It's hard to just, as any parent with any kid, to see how they're experiencing life and how they're going through their school experience, but to do it when our experience was very different than their experience. And so I feel like we're hyper aware.
Yeah.
And always on the lookout.
Sure.
But we never know. We never have a clear.
Yeah. And you said something about, like all parents are wondering and kind of watching out for their kids, and you're their advocate, and you're their buffer.
Yeah, we've started to have those conversations, and those are tough conversations to have, because you want to just, he's a boy, be a boy, but he's of that age where we've got to, we obviously look out for him, but we've got to now equip him to look out for himself. And, he is perceived by the entire world differently than certainly I was growing up. And so to teach him the tools to keep himself safe, in interactions with everything, especially with cops.
My kids, they're kids of color, they're biracial, but their experience and the way they're racialized in school as Asian white kids is not the same as your kids.
Right. It scares me to death to be raising a Black boy who's going to become a teenager in the next couple of years. But at the same time, I don't want him to become hamstrung by that or paralyzed by some sort of fear. And so it's really difficult. It's a really difficult conversation to have.
Race is this really nebulous thing where it's a made-up thing, right? Mm-hmm. And at the same time, it is our reality. Right. And for Black kids, it is a daily reality. And so the conversations that you're having to have are really life and death.
And our son has developed a fascination for war and guns, as a lot of little boys do.
Yeah.
We have incidences in our recent past where there are kids out playing with fake guns out in a park and they get shot. And so I have said, when they want to take guns, even they're giant orange Nerf guns, but they want to take them out into the front yard, I say, no, you got to stay in the backyard. You got to stay out back. And I believe we've said to him flat out, like, you are going to be looked at differently by people. Mm-hmm. And if you have a gun out there and who knows what's going to happen.
We've been talking a lot about how can we keep Xander safe? How can we keep Zoe safe? And really, it's not, the onus is not on them.
Right. Yeah.
The onus is on everybody else who has racial privilege, who has skin color privilege.
Totally.
You need to get their friends together and talk to their friends like, well, you're all white.
Right.
And so when you guys do those stupid pranks that, white kids can get away with, it's fine, but, Xander's with you, and he's looked by law enforcement differently. And so, it takes a village to raise a kid. Well, it's the same thing, we need our friends to realize that he's also, going to be viewed differently. And so it's interesting to sort of think, not just my kid, but everybody around them needs to be educated as well about these issues.
And so I love that idea of the conversation isn't about just with Xander, it's about everybody he's with, all of his friends, them recognizing who they are and with their privilege and what, as a friend, was important for them to do. And so how can white folks, white parents talk to their white children about their position?
I didn't have these conversations with my parents growing up, and if you're not having the conversations with your kids, if you're white parents with white kids, if you're not having those conversations, then the world is, what kind of messages is the world sending to your kids about other kids of of color and people of color? If you want to shape how your kids have views on those issues, then you need to have specific conversations now.
I was just thinking about when you bring these conversations up and being white men, wondering how that lands. Because I think sometimes as a Asian woman, going in and talking about race, people are like, oh, there she is talking about race again, But when you bring up race, there's a different sort of response from folks than maybe Black parents or Latino parents might get within a school system. So I'm just sort of curious about how that's been.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know the experience of a person of color having that conversation, but I can absolutely understand that there's probably a lot more receptiveness to and willingness to do what we ask.
We've been privileged to the conversation of privilege.
I mean, I think there's a lot of willingness, but it's both not having to address it and not knowing how to address it and not knowing what to do. And it, like you said, it could be my own privileged conversation that I have with these people. For Black History Month, I was trying to push our school to do something, our very predominantly white school to do something, but I don't know what to do. And that's complicated too, because I also don't feel like our school districts are set up to help with that either. And when I kind of sought out help from the school district to say, hey, what resources do you have for a school to be able to put on something like this? Because teachers are strapped and administrations are strapped. They don't have a lot of extra time to do that. There was not a lot of resources to move forward on that.
When I meet people and have conversations around race and racism, my first approach or the lens that I use is that most people are well-meaning and well-intentioned. Then the next step is when it becomes uncomfortable, those conversations become more uncomfortable. That's when I can see people either withdraw, I'm so happy you're doing this work, and good luck with that.
Right.
And trying to figure out how to bring people in and have them lean in more toward that discomfort and have those difficult conversations. And you use the term white fragility, recognize their white fragility, which comes up as defensiveness or, I'm not racist, or I don't think that goes on in the school, or that kind of rhetoric.
Yeah.
I guess I'm wondering, for you, what are some of the ways in which you sort of have broken through some of those barriers around resistance?
I have no problem using my white privilege to find a way to have those conversations and to push that conversation further into my community for the sake of my kids and other kids. And I fully am understanding that I'm using my privilege to do that, but I think that's my obligation to do so.
That persistence piece, though, just not letting people off easy. And I mean, in the same way, when we think about talking about race with kids, that there's this level of persistence as parents as well, where even when it's really hard and painful, that it's important to continue talking about it.
Before I had children, I can sort of put myself in the position of, the people that we try and to motivate to do something that don't have, children that are Black. And you get it, like you said, everybody's well-meaning, everybody thinks it's a good idea, but they don't have to do anything about them.
And they don't have to.
Right, they don't have to. And why would you, right? And it is hard. How do you draw those people across that line and say, well, I need your help? And I think this goes back to the fact that if you are white, you have a privilege to speak about these issues. I mean, that being a white ally, I have learned is powerful, and it's actually, it's not that difficult. I mean, if you just start speaking about these issues as a white male to in a room of other white people or other white males who are also, privileged as well, it takes on a different meaning, because somebody who looks like them is talking about these issues. But I think if people understood that just a little bit of effort coming from that place of privilege can actually go a long ways, that maybe they would be willing to do that.
Yeah. What are those little bits of effort that you have seen in your roles as parents and also as white allies?
One thing that I think we very consciously did when we first decided to be parents is that we wanted to be very open about it. We want to be open about being gay men, about having kids, and because we felt that openness, it goes back to the long legacy in the gay community of being out and open, and that changes minds. And so we're like, we're going to do this, and we're going to be out and open using social media to share our lives with people, which was not always easy and often inconvenient. But we felt it was important to do and speak up on issues. And then when the kids came, it's sort of like grown into that more. And so that, we're bringing along through our journey of parenthood a larger community. I think that it hopefully has changed their view. And when I ask questions on social media or whatever about, hey, why aren't there any books about black kids that don't, involve the civil rights movement? Like,
right.
why can we not have more representation in more ways? And it causes people to think and go,
Sure.
oh, and I've had many people reach out to me and say, like, I've never really thought about this until you've suggested this. And because it's going to be exhausting for our kids for their whole life.
Yeah.
And we know, being parts of the LGBT community, we know how exhausting it is to educate people and constantly bring people up to speed on, how they can be better allies or whatever.
Sure.
And so we know that if we can take any of that burden, at least while they're kids, off of their shoulders and impact the greater community so that their safe space becomes larger, that's our job as parents.